In JavaScript tutorial 3, we're looking at for loops. I've got an empty JavaScript file open here, and it's just linked to an index.html file. If we have the same code that we want to execute multiple times in JavaScript, then one way we can do that is using a for loop. Let's write one out right now. Let's write for and then a set of brackets. And then inside these brackets, we're going to put three things. We're going to put where we want the counter to start for our for loop, our loop continuation condition, which is just a condition that will be checked for every pass of the loop to decide whether or not to do another pass of the loop. The third thing is the value that we want our counter to change by. So for the start, let's make a variable. Let's say let I equal 0. So we've just made I, and I is going to be our counter for the loop. We're going to use I again in our condition. Let's say I is less than 10. So this loop will keep going as long as I is less than 10, then it'll keep doing another pass. Then we'll say I plus plus, just to increase the value of I by 1 for every pass of the loop. And then we'll put a set of curly braces. And in these curly braces, we're going to put the statements that we want to execute for every pass of the loop. So let's just write console.log, and then in quotation marks, I is plus I. So this will print out I is, and then the value of I, depending on what it is for each pass of the loop. And note that there is no semicolon after the I plus plus here. So there's a semicolon after let I equals 0 and I is less than 10, but none after I plus plus. Now let's go open up this HTML in the browser. Open up the console and see what we have here. We have I is 0 all the way through till I is 9. So I starts at 0 because we set it to 0. The loop keeps going as long as I is less than 10, and I increases by 1 for every pass of the loop. We don't necessarily have to declare let I inside of here. We could make it outside of the for loop. We could just say let I out here, and then inside of here we would just say I equals 0. Writing let I inside of the for loop just makes it really obvious what I is for. It's just indicating to anyone who looks at it that I is obviously the counter for the for loop. And we could set I to whatever we want here. We could say let I equal -5. And now we'll just get everything from -5 up to 9 printed out. For our loop continuation condition here, there's a few more things we could put. We've said while I is less than 10. We could say while I is greater than something. So here we could put while I is greater than, let's go with -10. If we ran this right now, we would get an infinite loop because I starts at -5 and I is going to keep increasing as long as I is greater than -10, but it's always going to be greater than -10. If we ran this right now, we would get an infinite loop because I starts at -5, and the loop's going to keep going as long as I is greater than -10, which it always will be because I is just increasing. So we get an infinite loop. It's just going to keep printing out values. I'll stop it. And let's change some of the values in the for loop before we open it back up. Let's say let I equal 50. And we'll have the loop keep going still as long as I is greater than -10, but this time we're going to decrease the value of I by 1. So we're going to get everything from 50 to -9 printed to the console. So it starts at 50 and goes all the way to -9. Other things we could put in for our loop continuation condition, we could have while I is greater than or equal to -10. So right now this would just make the loop do one extra pass. So it's going to go from 50 to -10 now, whereas before it stopped at -9 since -9 was the last number that was greater than -10. But this time we'll get up to -10 printed. And we can do the same with less than or equal to. So here we did greater than or equal to. We could do less than or equal to. Again, we'd have to change the values in here, otherwise this loop wouldn't even run right now. And we don't have to be changing the value of the loop just by 1 every time. We could say I plus equals 2. So this is going to be increasing I by 2 for every pass of the loop. So right now we have let I equals 50 to start with. And let's say keep going while I is less than or equal to 100. So we're going to get everything from 50 to 100 printed to the screen, but counting by 2 this time. And we can also use the value of variables inside of here. We don't just have to have numbers. So we could have something like let num dogs equal 10 and let num dogs fed equal 0. And then the loop will just feed the dogs. So we'd have something like set num dogs fed to 0 at the start of the loop. It is already set to 0, but we just have to indicate that at the start of the loop so that the loop knows that it's going by the value of num dogs fed. And we want the loop to keep going as long as the number of dogs fed is less than the number of dogs. And for each pass of the loop, let's just feed one dog. Let's say num dogs fed plus plus, and then console.log num dogs minus num dogs fed. So that'll just give us the number of dogs that need to be fed still. And let's put that in brackets just to make it clear what's happening here. So we have the number of dogs that need to be fed, and then we're just going to put a plus, and then in quotations we're going to write some text here. It'll print out the number of dogs that need to be fed still, and then we'll say dogs still need to be fed. So it's just going to tell us how many dogs need to be fed still. And let's set this to less than or equal to num dogs, just so for the final pass of the loop we get the message saying that 0 dogs still need to be fed. If you're not totally following the logic of that right now, then don't worry. Once you write out enough for loops, then it starts to make a lot more sense. Let's print this to the console and see what we get. So we get 10 dogs still need to be fed, and then the dogs keep getting fed until 0 dogs still need to be fed.